In today's episode, I talk about the benefits of starting small and the dangers of overinvesting. Welcome to Monologues by Hassie. One tendency I've found with myself when I get really interested in a new idea or a new venture is that, historically speaking, I have been guilty of over-investing. And what do I mean by over-investing? For example, let's take this podcast. Now, I've been doing this podcast for about 3 years, but what a lot of people don't know is that I wanted to do a podcast 3 years before that, so almost like 5 or 6 years ago. And I bought the mic that I'm using right now, which was a very expensive mic for me back then. It was about 250 Australian dollars. I bought that mic 2 years before I even recorded the first podcast episode. I over-invested in that decision. Now, I know that this is completely true because ever since having this mic and recording this podcast, there have been times where I've had to travel overseas and record either using my laptop's mic or using a $20 Samsung Go mic. And this always made me thought, man, you could have started your podcast with the $20 mic. You could have proven, doesn't matter whether you prove to the rest of the world and whether they listen to it, but you could have proved to yourself that you had the capacity to record episodes and upload them to the internet. And based on that proof that you could do it, then you could go and buy that $250 mic. But that's not how I quite did it. I overinvested at the start of my journey. And it's not a bad thing now that I've had this podcast and we've done over 125 episodes. It makes complete sense to have this. But when I first bought it, it did not make sense. Now, some people will make the argument, if you've ever seen the movie, I think it's, what is it, Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. Yes, that is absolutely true in certain domains. But I think a lot of people shoot themselves in the foot, myself included, by having that wrong philosophy. Now, let me tell you examples of where I didn't overinvest and I was able to make the proper investment in due course. So when I became very interested in becoming a technologist, a software developer, the first thing I did was enrolled in a TAFE course. And when I got to that TAFE course, I was using my personal laptop, was this Mac that I bought all the way back in uni in 2013. And here I was in 2021 starting to do this TAFE course for the first time, and we needed particular pieces of software that would only run on a Windows machine. Now, I had the ability at that point in time to go and buy a very expensive laptop, but I didn't yet have a career in data analytics or data engineering or software engineering. I knew this was where I wanted to go, but I also knew that it wouldn't be wise to over-invest in my hardware. So what did I do? I went and bought an amazing laptop. In fact, I still have it and I don't use it as much anymore because I've since upgraded. But I bought what we call in Australia an ex-government laptop. These are laptops that the government uses for their staff. They'll use it for 2, 3, 4 years and they will resell it to a reseller who will sell it to the public. So I basically bought a laptop that was 3 to 4 years old and it was a really great laptop. It was really powerful, but it was only $1,000. Right? I could have easily gone and bought like a top-of-the-range Mac and installed Windows and had all this crazy power and maybe bought an expensive Windows laptop, but I didn't. I bought a second-hand ex-government laptop. And this was before I knew that I'd actually end up getting a job at a startup, which would start my technology career and give me a whole bunch of experience. So I didn't overinvest in that situation. So it's very different to my podcast. Let me give you another example where, again, I didn't overinvest and I only began to invest after I established myself in that domain. If I look at running, a lot of people are going to be absolutely horrified to know that I did the Sydney Marathon in $56 shoes. These were shoes I got at clearance at, Rebel Sport during some end of financial year sale. Now, sure, I didn't know I was going to run Sydney Marathon, so I was never planned on becoming a marathon runner. So why would I go and invest in shoes? But the point is, I ran City to Surf for the first time, the Sydney Marathon. I ran them in $56 shoes. A pair of shoes I had after that probably weren't that much more expensive. They were $60, $70, and this was as I was getting better at running. And I only bought my first pair of running shoes that cost more than $100 a few months ago. And now this is after running for 3 to 4 years badly and running a bit better for the last year. Only after I really got into running did I go and buy $260 shoes. Now, don't take the lesson from this being that I need to cheap out on important things. There are many things where you need to buy certain pieces of equipment to make sure you're safe, make sure you're unharmed. But there are many domains in life where you can prove yourself without making a huge overinvestment, and then you can decide where to allocate your money. The irony is, in many situations, the person who's a novice, who's a beginner, who's starting something, when they overinvest, they are overinvesting without having a good grasp of what it is they are getting into. As somebody who wasn't a data engineer or a software engineer, who wasn't even sure that I was going to be capable of learning the skill and even enjoying the skill, if I had overinvested in a laptop, that could have been extremely just detrimental. I could have simply just wasted money. But rather I bought this good enough laptop, this second-hand laptop that was a couple of years old, but still had great specifications. And I was able to prove myself as a developer. And then only last year or the year before, right? After I was working for 2.5 years as a technologist, as a data engineer, as a software engineer, only then did I go and buy a nice brand new laptop, which happens to be the one I'm using today. And so I proved myself first. I got out of that novice phase, and then I was able to make a wiser decision based on what I needed. Same thing came to running. Now, running is one of those things where I do recommend you get a good pair of shoes. But does a good pair of shoes need to be the most expensive pair there is? It probably doesn't. There are probably perfectly good pairs of shoes that maybe they're not too flashy, but they're going to do a great job at keeping your feet comfortable and able to run. And when you start off running, you're probably not going to be running at a very fast pace. You're not going to be Usain Bolt. So why don't you start with a cheaper pair of shoes? I'm not talking about bad quality, but maybe something you can get on sale, something on discount, something that might have been expensive had you bought it when it was first released. So buy a good pair, but don't make the mistake of overinvesting before you've gotten past that beginner or novice phase. Now, I gave you 2 examples of where I did the right thing, one being me buying a cheaper laptop before I became a technologist, and the second being not over-investing in running shoes until I became a very serious runner. Now that I run 20 kilometers a week, it makes sense for me to really, really care about my shoes. But until then, it wasn't really a huge priority. And yeah, a lot of people aren't aware that up until, February this year, I did not own a pair of running shoes that cost more than $100. Everything was, we are talking 2-digit running shoes in terms of dollar value. But if I look at the mistakes, even the podcast mic that I'm using now sat there for 2 years completely unutilized. In that time, that money could have been allocated to somewhere else. It could have been invested in an area of my life that would have given me a better return for those 2 years. I'm not just talking about stock market investments. I'm talking about there could have been other hobbies or passions that I could have put that money into and had a much cheaper podcast mic as I was developing that skill. Another really extreme example I can think of, and this is when I was much younger, and looking back at this was really stupid, but when I started tutoring students straight out of high school, I tutored chemistry, and I was very fortunate to have a very large class size that first year. I remember I had 10 students, and having 10 students gave me these ideas of grandeur. Now, sure, I was good at chemistry, but the whole idea of, providing a service, running a business, these things were all new to me. If anything, they're still new to me. And I remember I wanted to rent a room, not rent for a few hours. I wanted to rent a commercial property, like a unit where I could have a permanent classroom. Now, part of me being young and dumb was like, oh, wow, cool. When you're not teaching, you can crash there, you can invite your friends and all these cool, really stupid things. But even though I didn't go and execute it, my naive brain was thinking of ways to overinvest before I'd even proven to myself that running a tutoring business was something I wanted to do. Now, I know many people who did run tutoring businesses, and some of those tutoring businesses are still around even after 10, 12 years we've been out of high school. So some people took it really seriously. But in my case, that wasn't me when it came to tutoring. And so if I had gone and done that, I would have sunk probably majority of my earnings into this underutilized property. What I ended up doing instead was I ended up renting a hall for about, I can't remember how much it was back then. Maybe it was $25 to $30 an hour, but it was a community hall from the local council. It was a small room. It had plastic chairs. It had some tables that I could set up and put away before and after a session, but it wasn't an overinvestment. It made sense versus renting commercial real estate for a year and fitting it out and putting whiteboards in. That was just completely unnecessary, but naturally my brain went there. And the problem is, when a lot of people start something new, they think of the biggest way to do it. So the whole purpose of this episode, and I guess the thoughts that I'm putting out there right now, is that it makes a lot of sense that when we're starting out, try to start small. And every time I haven't started small, I've often set myself back. Even the idea of buying this $250 podcast potentially might have been the reason why I didn't podcast for 2 years. Because I put such a high pressure on myself to perform when I hadn't actually built the identity of me being a podcaster. And today, even though I have this great mic, I'm still happy to use my $20 mic if it need be. And I've learned a lot. Now, when it comes to things, when it comes to your health and safety, the food you eat, please go and eat well. But there are many other domains where the amount of money you spend isn't really critical when you're starting off. Maybe you're learning to code for the first time. Do you need the world's most expensive computer? Or do you need to prove that you can code using the computer you have? Why don't you push the computer you have to its limits and then decide to go get the expensive laptop, right? Prove to yourself that you actually like the idea that's in your head. If your goal is to be a programmer, prove to yourself that you want to be a programmer and then make the investment, that big investment, right? So my prompt to all of those of you who are listening to this is, think about times where maybe you've done what I've done, where you've gone down a path and you've overinvested in something, and has that overinvestment, well, in your case, maybe that overinvestment actually led to great success, but maybe it also led to you actually abandoning, or maybe you sabotaged what it was you were trying to do in the first place. And think about things that you want to do in the future. How can you start it in a very small way? And the benefit of that is a lot of people hold off on their dreams because they have a really big vision of how they want to start off. Somebody says, I want to travel the world and I want to do this really expensive $20,000 trip to Europe. And that's great. That's a wonderful goal. And you can hold off traveling for many years until you have the investment to go there. But maybe you can do a smaller trip, maybe even to a single country or single city in Europe for a fraction of the price. Maybe you can begin to enjoy traveling in your local country. Maybe you can go to a part of the city you live in that you're not familiar with and go visit it for a day. And so with every goal you have, if your goal is to become a traveler, you can start traveling locally. You don't need to start by making the massive investment. Yes, it might not be as Instagram worthy, and that's all relative and all subjective. Because remember, what's local for you is international for somebody else. What you take for granted, being a very small investment, being in your neighborhood, is a massive investment for somebody from overseas who would come to visit that same thing. So think of ways where you can start small. This could be in whatever domain you're trying to do. Of course, there are exceptions where you want to make great investments in your health and your safety. But outside of that, what can you start today with a very small investment, both in time, in money? How can you get started? And so with this, I will end this episode. And to all of you listening, I wish you great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.